Hey everyone, I'm Jonah,
I'm Connor.
and welcome back to Rank and File Sports. After dealing with injuries through most of 2024, Thomas Castellanos is transferring to Florida State after beating them in one of what we thought was the biggest upsets of the 2024 season back in week one. Now, Castellanos, he played very, very well and had Boston College as a top 25 team through the first three games before he started dealing with some injuries and eventually didn't play as well to end the season. Now, it's really going to depend on whether or not he can get back to that potential that he showed in the first three games for whether or not Florida State can have a good year this season, or if we're going to see a repeat of what we had last year with DJ Uiagalelei. Looking at their schedule, starting with Alabama is absolutely brutal, and then you got a couple tough ACC games with both Miami, Clemson, and another SEC matchup with Florida. So 7 games at home, 5 on the road, and that's going to be a schedule difficulty of 5 out of 10.
Yeah, with that schedule difficulty, it's the majority is these tough games, specifically these two SEC games they have at the beginning and the ends of their season, starting it off against Kalen DeBoer and the Alabama Crimson Tide. While it's not exactly the same situation, both programs are coming off, I would say, one of they didn't meet the expectations that were expected of them. Florida State was awful, finished bottom of the ACC, won two games all year, and one of those was a conference game. Alabama finished what 9-4, missed the playoffs, wasn't in the top four in the SEC standings. Both these teams need a little jump start, and them getting matched up week one at Florida State is gonna be it's going to be an electric environment. I don't know if Florida State's going to stand much of a chance in this one. Like Jonah was saying, season kind of hinges on Thomas Castellanos returning to form pre-injury and limiting turnovers and being the athletic guy that he can be. Alabama's got to figure out who their starting quarterback is going to be. Spring games are starting up this week or have actually started. So we're going to start paying a lot more attention to those quarterback battles in some of those key situations, Alabama being one of them. But the big thing is Florida State is a very young team. They will have a running back who just finished his freshman season last year, stepping into the starting role. The majority of the wide receiver room is gutted, and while most of the stats are probably at fault with DJU at quarterback, who had a horrendous season, this Florida State team is going to be young and is going to need a couple games to get in a good rhythm, get a good flow with their young guys. But starting it off against Alabama is not going to be a game where you're going to have the ability to work guys in and get some good reps. So 15% chance for the Seminoles in this one against the Crimson Tide. But then the following week they have East Texas A&M coming to the stadium, and that's an 100% chance right there. East Texas A&M is not gonna stand any chance in this one because I don't think Florida State's going to be nearly as bad as they were last year. So they're going to get a win early on, and then they have a very early bye week the following week.
Yeah, and even as bad as they were last year, they still wouldn't have lost to an East Texas A&M type team.
No,
After that bye week, you go from an FCS team to one of the worst teams in the FBS. Another
the
100%
worst.
chance here. Yeah, another 100% chance here. Golden Flashes, no chance at Doak Campbell Stadium. Then you got Virginia. This one's on the road on a Friday night. This is a trap game if I've ever seen one because you have Miami coming up next. We have it as a 75% chance of a Florida State win, but watch out. That is probably one of the biggest games to look out for on the schedule as far as, trap games go. Speaking of the next tough game, Miami. Carson Beck transferring in from Georgia. We're not super high on Carson Beck, but still, I'd say if Thomas Castellanos is up to his potential that he was at the start of last season, maybe they're comparable. Very different players, but overall talent-wise, I'd say maybe they're comparable. I just don't know if we can really bet on that yet. Even though this one's at home for Florida State, overall, Miami, much more solid season last year. So we have to give them credit for that. This one is only a 25% chance for Florida State to win. Next up, you have Pittsburgh. This one also at home. And this one, I do believe Florida State will be favored in. Pitt, we saw, had a really strong start to last year before fizzling out in the second half of the season. So I do think that, they should be competitive in this game. I think it'll be a really close one. But overall, I think this is maybe where Castellanos starts to put himself in just a little bit of a different tier and kind of separates himself from some of the more mid quarterbacks in the ACC. I do think he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. And this Pitt game is really where we're going to start to see that. And then against Stanford on October 18th, this one, very, very long distance to travel for Florida State. Something to watch out for, but they do get a bye week after it, which is very nice. So it shouldn't affect them too much for the next week. But during that game, it's definitely something to watch out for. Regardless, I do think Florida State is the better team and should be able to pick up a win on the road at about a 70% chance.
Then starting their final stretch of the season, they started off with a home game against Wake Forest. Wake Forest was one of the bottom teams in the ACC last year, along with Florida State and Stanford, finishing 2-6 in the conference, 4-8 overall. But overall, I think with the amount of talent Florida State actually has coming in at this point in the season, especially after that bye week and having some real tough games earlier on, I think they'll be able to get their young guys clicking with Thomas Castellanos, and hopefully the defense is a little bit better compared to what we saw last year. So I think Florida State should have really no problems handling this Demon Deacons team, giving them an 85% chance here. Then they go on the road to face Clemson, the reigning ACC champions. Cade Klubnik is back at quarterback and is looking to make his case for the Heisman winner going into next season. I believe, at least in my opinion, it's him, Garrett Nussmeier, and even though I don't fully believe in him, I'm still going to say Arch Manning is up there. It's probably the top three front runners going into next season. But I really think Cade Klubnik can get it done. We saw towards the end of last season, he really put that Clemson team on his back and led them to that ACC championship game where they beat SMU, got into the college football playoffs, and even though they did end up losing to Texas, and Texas was pretty much in control the whole game, he still had a very solid game, and I think he can elevate it up just another level to get into that real elite tier going into next season. With it being at Death Valley, I don't think there's much of a chance here for the Seminoles and giving them a 20% chance to get the upset here. Then they come back home to face Virginia Tech. The Hokies were an interesting team last year. They had some potential. We saw that they almost beat Miami last year in Miami, and they're returning their starting quarterback in Drones, but a lot of the team is getting gutted otherwise. Their wide receiver room is losing a lot of senior guys. I don't know. I can't remember what the running back room looks like, but it's essentially going to be back on the shoulders of the returning quarterback. And it's going to be a quarterback duel in this one. I think both Drones and Castellanos are very similar. They're both really athletic guys that have had some issues turning the ball over in the past, but I think Thomas Castellanos has played at a higher level, or we've seen him play at a higher level against tougher competition a few more times than we've seen Drones. So I like Florida State in this one, especially this late in the season. Whoever the young guys they have in these important positions, especially in the skill positions on offense, I think they're going to really start clicking. And I think by now the offense is going to be pretty fluid. So I like Florida State to be slightly favored in this one, especially with it at home. But this is going to be essentially a toss-up of a game, giving them a 55% chance to beat the Hokies. Then they go on the road for the last two games of the season, starting off with NC State. NC State was one of the most disappointing teams in the ACC and just in college football in general last year, along with Florida State. a lot of aspirations of competing for that ACC title. They had some very successful seasons in the past few years, but last year was not it. Finished 3-5 in conference, 6-7 overall, which like isn't bad, but they had aspirations of being 8, 9, maybe close to 10 wins, and that they just never got to that level. And I don't think they're gonna rebound as much going into next season. I think they're gonna lose a couple guys. I don't really know a lot about NC State, but I don't think there's enough buzz around them to really think that they're gonna be a competitive team going into next season. So an 80% chance for this Florida State team that I think is more athletic and more talented to get the win here. Then finally, they have the in-state rivalry game against the Florida Gators on the road. Should be a really exciting game, especially if throughout the course of the season, Florida State actually shows some signs of life and looks like a competitive team compared to last season. This game could get really interesting, especially with Florida probably having playoff implications, fighting for an SEC title potentially. This is going to be a huge high stakes game. And at the end of the day, Florida has DJ Lagway back at the helm at the quarterback position after a very successful season. Yes, he dealt with some injuries and wasn't always there, but he showed signs, he showed flashes of being a really elite quarterback. And I think with that season under his belt, with that freshman season under his belt, he's going to have an explosion next year. I think he is going to break out and be one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football next year. I think Billy Napier is fighting for his job and he's going to get a very solid season out of this Gators team, and it's going to culminate in that win against Florida State. So I'm giving the Seminoles a 20% chance here because it is a rivalry game. Maybe I could boost that up a little bit, but I really do think this Florida team is just way more talented. It's going to be playing a lot tougher competition throughout the entirety of the season. If I remember correctly, I think we had them with like a 9 out of 10 on schedule difficulty when we did their schedule preview. So they're going to be tested throughout the entire season, and this Florida State team is just going to be another step on their ladder.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on what you just said about Florida. As for the whole schedule for Florida State, I mean, I would say that Alabama, Clemson, and Florida, I just can't see Florida State winning any of those games. So I would honestly put those as guaranteed losses. I could maybe see them beating Miami. But other than that, I think 8-4 is probably the max that we'll see Florida State at this season, which I know it probably isn't what Florida State fans want to hear after making the playoffs 2 years ago. But again, if you were to go 8-4 after a 2-10 season, that would be a very big improvement. That being said, the 2-10 season is really what's going to make me personally bring my prediction down a little bit. I think maybe we'll see a little bit of a disappointing performance in a couple games. I pointed out Virginia earlier. That definitely could be one of them. Maybe Virginia Tech as well, something like that. Could be NC State as well. So yeah, I think in the end we're probably going to see Florida State somewhere around 6-6, but there's definitely the potential that they could win a game or two more.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you there. If I was a Florida State fan, I'd be perfectly fine with them going 500, just considering that this team is very young and has a quarterback coming in off of an injury. I think if they were to have a 500 team, but were able to compete with the likes of Miami and maybe just not like roll over and just succumb against Clemson, Florida, and Alabama, if they can just look like a more competent team compared to what we saw last year with DJU as their quarterback, then I think Florida State fans will be a lot happier. I agree with you. I think 8-4 is probably the max we'll see them at. I just think there are way too many experienced teams on this schedule that I think just pure youth and talent is going to be able to overcome. And then, yeah, that Virginia game is an interesting one, especially with it being earlier on in the season, having that early bye week and having two really easy games before that. And then that Virginia Tech game, just because it's sandwiched in between that Clemson and Florida game, And because Virginia Tech is kind of like a similar team, they're going to be a young team with a returning quarterback that has experience. That could be an interesting one, but I really do think that we'll probably see this Florida State team go around 500, 6-6. Maybe they get to 7 wins, but I do think that they're probably going to go bowling next season.
Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that Florida State could be in a bowl game next year, which is a big improvement, like I said earlier, from their 2-10 record in 2024. The projected win total is actually sitting at 7.1 wins for Florida State this year, which is definitely a very encouraging sign for getting to that bowl game. And like we said, we're going to go with 500 for now, but honestly, that's probably a somewhat conservative prediction. I think there's a really good chance we could see a 7-win Florida State team, maybe even 8. But for right now, we're going to stick with 6-6 and really pay attention to how Thomas Castellanos performs in that spring game. And we'll update these predictions again later during the summer. Now, Vegas has the over under set at 7.5 wins. It is favoring the under. But again, another really good sign for Florida State getting back to a bowl game this year and starting to rebuild the program towards maybe potentially making another playoff run here in the next few seasons. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.